Did you know that there are about 750,000 Canadians with a disability who could be working but aren't? I was reading an article about this in Canadian Affairs at the end of May 2024. The article was discussing a recent StatsCan report on the Canadian Survey on Disability and said nearly half of unemployed adults with disabilities, almost 750,000, had potential to work, meaning they could have paid employment if the labor market was fully accessible, there was no discrimination, and they had the accommodations they needed. So, what we're talking about here is equity, as in diversity, equity, and inclusion. 3 words that get some people in Canada all riled up and tend to bring out their worst qualities. But regardless of whether it's for persons with a disability or another marginalized group, why are some people against DEI programs? That's what this video is going to explore. As part of broader efforts to make a more inclusive society, the Liberal government in 2022 introduced a Disability Inclusion Action Plan to support people with disabilities start their own business or find good-paying jobs. It's an example of an action taken to reduce inequities and seems like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you want everyone to live their best lives and realize their potential to contribute to this amazing society we live in Canada? We know that working helps people to have a sense of purpose and can help them feel better about themselves, besides the much more obvious benefit of having their skills available to employers. As for those who get all worked up about DEI, sure, there are some who are just plain mean, but there's also a lot of others who really don't mind people having equal opportunity. They just object to what DEI programs are structured to achieve. That's what I want to dig into. Equal opportunity is a starting point that still isn't fair to everyone. Should we look at the starting point or where we want people to get to in the end? That's where the real difference of opinion surfaces. I'm going to really focus on the equity piece because I think inclusion and ultimately diversity stem from doing the equity part well. And figuring out what equity actually means is the first thing you need to wrap your head around. Equity is different from equality. Equality says that all people should be treated the same. On the surface, that seems fair, right? Equity, on the other hand, looks at a person's unique circumstances, where they're coming from, the obstacles they've faced, and adjusts their treatment accordingly so that everyone involved is on a level playing field. Equality is giving everyone the same pair of shoes. Equity is giving each person the pair of shoes that fits. That's fair, right? Fairness is, of course, a loaded term. What's fair to a group of forward-thinking, liberal-minded people may seem out of this world unfair to others who simply see things differently. When opponents of DEI initiative hear the word equity, they may translate that to mean resources or opportunities being taken away from one group and given to another more favored group. They would see equity as being fundamentally unfair because it punishes hard-working, productive people just so that an opportunity can be handed to someone who didn't earn the chance through their own merit. The problem with this view is they believe there's a meritocracy. If everyone has the same opportunity, they believe everyone will be able to succeed on their own merits. But this system doesn't actually exist. In Canada, there's systemic racism, there's misogyny, there's homophobia, transphobia, and other biases. And before you start hammering out a comment to post, I am not saying that everyone watching this video is a racist, misogynist homophobe. But let's face it, some people in Canada are. And for lots of others, I think it's easier for people who have never faced any of these biases to look around and say, what bias? The system we're in seems to be working just fine. Yeah, sure it is for you, and for me, to be perfectly honest. But throw into the mix issues of low family income, race, ethnicity, occupation, gender identity, and you wouldn't see the system as working nearly as well. And layer on top of that the intersection of multiple biases. Think of the barriers faced by a queer black woman with a visible disability. Would they believe the system is fair? Another reason people are opposed to equity approaches is they consider it unfair to give special treatment, resources, or access to a group of people simply because of the aggregate situation of that group. They point to the principle that equity looks at someone's individual situation and the barriers they face, Giving special treatment to historically disadvantaged groups is more than unfair in their eyes. It's actually harmful to those it's trying to help, because it tells them they need special help, encourages a victim mentality, discourages personal responsibility and effort, and deprives them of the growth that happens when one overcomes obstacles. You sure, cherish that wonderful feeling of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and working 10 times harder than someone else just so you can have the same opportunity. I think many of the same people who think you just need to work hard don't realize that privilege exists. That privilege includes not having to worry about having a good breakfast before you leave for work in the morning, or getting encouragement from a loving family, not being stopped by police for driving while black, or being able to get out of your home without assistance. There was a good article in The Hill in April 2024 where it talks about issues of equity being like dominoes in a person's life. The author is a doctor and talked about the compounding effect of multiple challenges. If a mother doesn't have access to prenatal care because she doesn't have a family doctor and no means of getting herself to another medical support, her child stands to have a worse outcome at birth. And if that same child is born into a neighborhood with high crime rates and old homes with mold issues and lead paint, that child's chances are diminished further. And if that child's school doesn't have the right resources to support a good education, including maybe a school breakfast program, for instance, and the mother can't afford a computer to participate in online learning, that child will be less likely to grow up to find a stable job with good benefits. This all ultimately will impact how long that child lives, and the dominoes of that life and other children with similar challenges and barriers in that neighborhood will continue to fall into familiar and predictable patterns. Outcomes are not just about the choices an individual makes, but the choices available to people in any community. It isn't very fair or accurate to say in this situation, well, if that mother just worked harder, the outcome would be different. She's probably doing the best that she can with what she has available. Okay, we have different opinions, and even though I think a caring society should try to level the playing field for everyone through DEI programs, I recognize that in many cases we're encouraging DEI initiatives in private businesses as well. Those businesses that don't want to appeal to a broader audience could just carry on the way they have been and ignore DEI issues. I don't think that's the right thing for them to do, but they could. We could passively encourage DEI programs, but it's actually going beyond that now. There was an article in Talent Canada, it's an HR publication, in April 2024 that reported about the situation in the US, where about 1/3 of states are taking action against DEI initiatives. For instance, in Tennessee, there's new legislation that prohibits banks and other financial institutions, private businesses, from considering customers' participation in DEI or social justice programming. In Kansas, there's legislation prohibiting DEI considerations at higher education institutions. Iowa is looking to ban all DEI offices and initiatives in higher education that don't already fall under federal law. They just don't want them doing anything extra. The argument they're using? It's the same one I already mentioned, that DEI initiatives are promoting an agenda that elevates racial or gender identity over individual merit. Not to be outdone, here in Canada, there was a recent review of DEI research conducted by what appears to be a conservative-leaning think tank, not the Fraser Institute this time, that talked about people getting fired for challenging DEI initiatives, students expelled, and even someone who took his own life because he challenged a DEI facilitator. This review concluded that DEI instruction has been shown to increase prejudice and activate bigotry among participants by bringing existing stereotypes to the top of their minds or by implanting new biases that they hadn't previously held. So we should just not talk about it then. The current discussion of equity initiatives raises a lot of questions for me. Shouldn't we all want a Canada where every person, regardless of where they live, their income, race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, has a fair opportunity to not just survive, but to thrive? Do you believe that's the case in Canada right now? Are we at least on the right track? Are you, as an individual, able to look past your own experience and see that the experience of other people may be way different than yours? And finally, do you think all of this will get better or worse in 2025 if someone else is in charge?